Hello, what a pleasure it is to see all of you. And as a Rotarian, it is an absolute pleasure to be able to host you because, as Kim was just mentioning, Rotary is an international organization and there are unique opportunities that are available to each of you. So by way of introduction, I am the District Governor of District 6540, which represents the top 1/3 of the state of Indiana. We are also 2,500 members strong, and if you looked out across your community, you'd find a lot of the people that you know, some of your teachers, the superintendents, perhaps your mom or dad are a member of one of our Rotary clubs. But the thing is, you guys, I'm not just the district governor. We are all volunteers, and our volunteer message is to do good in the world. World Affairs is something everybody here volunteered to do to bring this message to you. So understand that, as the message up there says, Rotary International is a worldwide organization of over 1.2 million volunteers across the globe. Our mission is to build goodwill and peace throughout the world. As today's topic is immigration, note that Rotary is not an American organization. It was started back in 1905 in Chicago, but now is in over 200 countries. Our 1.2 million members are members of over 35,000 Rotary clubs. Recognize that while we're not American, we are also not having an American focus. Our job is to do good in the world. All Rotarians do not speak English. We are a non-political organization. We are in Afghanistan. We're in Poland. We're in India. We're in Ireland. We're in Australia, as Kim just mentioned, in Mexico, Spain. Keep adding the countries. And the fact is, we are all Rotarians, and that means we're a member of a Rotary club. We're all neighbors in Rotary. We're passionate about putting ourselves below the service that we perform, and we call that putting service above self. An important focus of Rotary International in our district is you. That is your welfare, your growth, and your future. As I'll just ask you, do any of you know, is there a Rotary club in your own community? You guys know? Actually, we've got Rotary clubs all over the place, and there's 57 clubs in northern Indiana, so most likely there is a Rotary club in your community. Recognize your local Rotary club supports scholarships, reading programs, school projects, anti-bullying, mentoring programs, sports programs. Every Rotary club is unique, but we have a common motto that we're saying, and it is a matter of leadership. So we say Rotary is a group of leaders who exchange ideas and choose to take action. So the action they do in your own community will be different based on what your community needs. Your local Rotary club offers study opportunities abroad. That's when Kim was talking about what we used to call group study exchange. Any of you guys know a youth exchange student at your school? Rotary Youth Exchange is one of the greatest programs we offer. You could be one of those Rotary Youth Exchange persons and go to another country. We have programs to help you hone in on your leadership skills to absolutely make a difference. Anybody here a member of an Interact club? Interact is international and action put together, and it is our high school programs that in essence says everything about what Rotary is doing as me as a professional, you could be doing as a high school student. We care about you, and it just makes good sense because all of you are our future. We want to help you to prepare to take care of this world that we all share. That's why we're here today. That's why we sponsor the Rotary World Affairs Conference every single year. Well, we've gathered all you bright students here in northern Indiana. We're having this same session in Valparaiso, in Hammond, Monticello, in Goshen, South Bend, and in Fort Wayne, where I'm at right now. And we're also having it in North Manchester at Manchester University. So recognize that your town's Rotary clubs have been sponsoring this conference for more than 10 years. Last year, did anybody attend last year? Last year, we talked about clean water and sanitation. Did you hear about what's happening in East Chicago? They've got water problems, lead poisoning. That's an issue in our world, is the use of clean water. Without clean water, all of us die. So today, we're talking about immigration. The year before, we talked about immunizations. because the fact is one of Rotary's biggest causes is the eradication of polio from the world. Have you all heard about polio? If you think of some of the countries or of the pictures that you see that shows the developing world, oftentimes you'll see crippled children, and they have been impacted by polio. But the fact is your parents probably gave you the vaccine, and so you all sit here comfortably in your chairs without the affliction of polio. We are very close to a full eradication of that disease with only 12 cases noted this year alone. The fact is the World Affairs Conference is addressing things that we all share as citizens of this world: global economy, climate change, outsourcing, immigration, and so on. This year we'll be focusing on immigration in the United States, as you already know. Rotary International is committed to helping the United States be the best that we can in this immigrant discussion. We encourage you to have conversations that can foster understanding within and across all of our cultures. We train adults and young leaders to prevent and mediate conflict, and in fact, we help refugees who have fled from dangerous areas. We also have 6 peace universities across the world that one of you or several of you could ultimately attend. At the forefront, though, Rotary focuses on peace. We hope you'll take away from today that you can learn much from simply having conversations with each other, through respectfully considering other people's viewpoints. We will talk about what's happening right here, right now, in the United States and in Indiana, in your own communities. As I walked in, I saw the screen up here, and I just read, oftentimes the media would have it portrayed that immigrants aren't welcome in the United States. Do you realize there's over 40 million people living in the United States that weren't born here? My husband is one of those. My mother is one of those, and you guys can probably add in. The fact is, the United States is one of the most welcoming areas in the world. Today we have 2 keynote speakers, followed by local panelists at each of the individual sites that we have. As I mentioned, Valparaiso, Hammond, South Bend, and North Manchester, along with Monticello. Our broadcast today is from the campus of Indiana University, Purdue University at Fort Wayne, now known as Purdue University at Fort Wayne. So let's get started. Our first keynote speaker is Dr. James A. McCann. He is a professor of political science for Purdue University, and he conducts research on the political incorporation of immigrants in the United States. In 2006, he began surveying Mexican immigrants about their political participation and other civic issues. He was a principal investigator for the 2012 Latino Immigrant National Election Study. He's on a team of scholars that has been collecting and evaluating survey data to better understand how Mexico is transitioning from the dominant party era to a new democratic system. He is co-author of Democratizing Mexico, Public Opinion and Electoral Choices, and he's co-editor of the official journal of the Western Political Science Association. His work has been published in a lot of leading journals, and his PhD came from the University of Colorado. After Dr. McCann's speech and a very brief break, we will then hear from a member of the College of Pharmacy, he is part of the faculty at Manchester University here in Fort Wayne. Dr. Ahmed Abdelmajid is an assistant dean of experiential education and community engagement for the College of Pharmacy. While he teaches pharmacy practice, he is focused on ensuring that Manchester's doctoral pharmacy students have successful externships, which is basically the opposite of internships, it's externships. He is a Muslim who was raised in Qatar, and he's active in interfaith conversations, panels, and events about Islam and coexistence. His family moved to Canada, where he earned his citizenship. He later moved to the United States in the year 2000 and earned his Doctor of Pharmacy degree from Ferris State up in Michigan. He's a board member of the Indiana Center for Middle East Peace, Muslim Alliance of Indiana, and United Way of Allen County. The Greater Fort Wayne Business Weekly recognized him recently in the annual 40 Under 40 Awards for making a difference in the community and in his own profession. The Indiana Pharmacies Alliance awarded him its 2017 award for outstanding community service. So, my friends, I'll tell you, there's some qualified people here to be able to talk to you about this issue we call immigration. Let's get started on our conversation, shall we? This day is all about you. You, as young people, have the greatest minds available to us now, and we want you to begin thinking about this immigration issue. We hope you'll make the most of it and enjoy it and carry on these conversations back when you get back to your school and your homes. Carry those conversations that you hear and be an active participant. The very best way that you can enjoy this session is to be active in it. Rotary welcomes you. Please seek out Rotary, Rotary.org. This is an amazing organization where we're focused on making our world a better place. I appreciate that you're here, and I'd like to welcome Dr. James McCann from Purdue University here. Enjoy your day.
Well, thanks again, everybody, for the invitation. It really is a pleasure to be here to talk to you a little bit about, my interests, what I've been doing at Purdue over the last several years. As was mentioned, I'm a professor of political science down in West Lafayette. I'm originally from Chicago, so not too far away, and I've spent most of my career at Purdue, so I've been there for quite some time. In my research life, the kinds of things I do, I focus on questions having to do with political participation, how representation happens, who's included, who's excluded. And about 10 or 12 years ago, I started looking at immigration. And the reason for that had to do with my interest in the politics of Mexico. For many years, I've studied Mexican politics. In the year 2000, I was an election observer in Mexico, so I could literally see them counting ballots, and I could watch voters vote. And about 12 years ago, Mexicans living in the United States got the right to vote transnationally, so they didn't have to return to Mexico, and they could still participate in Mexican elections. And I thought that was kind of a neat thing. We have so much discussion these days about globalized economics, but not too much about globalized citizenship. And so I started looking at this phenomenon, and the more I looked at it, the more interested I got in it. And so now the study of immigration has sort of taken over a lot of my research life. I'll plan to spend maybe about half an hour or so just talking, and then we'll have the other speaker, and then I'm looking forward to more informal Q&A and general discussion. It's customary to start any discussion of immigration by saying what one's own roots are. We heard that in the previous speaker. It's hard to talk about immigration without talking a little bit about yourself. So just in the spirit of cards on the table, let me say that my last name is Irish, but my Irish dad married an immigrant Italian lady, and that's kind of my story. So I'm sort of not too far away from the migration experience, even though I was born in Chicagoland. Okay, so you had, well, here, I'm going to frame my talk with this question: why not provide papers to the unauthorized? Okay, so I'm going to touch on a lot of current events. I'm going to talk about issues that are going to be sensitive, right? They're going to be real political. I wouldn't be a teacher of political science if I didn't believe that it's perfectly okay to talk about sensitive things and to talk about issues as adults and to really get into the weeds in terms of what we believe and what we value, okay? So what I'm going to do is unpack this question: why not provide papers to the unauthorized? Now, in answer to the question, how many immigrants are there? Well, there are about 43 million, 44 million these days. That asterisk is an estimate, okay, based on current census data. What you'll see is beginning in 1970, there was a significant uptick. Now, there were various reasons for that big uptick. Some of it had to do with changes in U.S. law, but the big drivers have to do with economic demand. We need people who can fill jobs in all kinds of sectors: agriculture, construction, hospitality. Lots of immigrants work in those areas. As a percentage of the population, it's about 1 out of 8 people living in the United States right now is foreign-born. Okay, that compares roughly to what we saw about 100 years ago in the last great wave of migration, where we saw a lot of settlement from Eastern Europe, Southern Europe. Okay, by way of comparison, Canada to the north, about 20% of that population is foreign-born. Where are they coming from? That was another one of your questions. Primarily, we're talking about Latin America and Asia. this is a slide that I got from the Migration Policy Institute. And we see that, excuse me, in 1960, primarily we're talking about European immigrants. Today, this purple line here, Asia, the blue line from the Americas. Now, turning to the real question about legal status. How many undocumented immigrants are there in this country? We've got about 11 million of them. Okay, so that's about a quarter of the total foreign-born population is undocumented. And what do you do with that population? This is the question at hand. I'm going to ask, why not authorize the unauthorized? I believe that we should. I've got some arguments here, but let me just say, in terms of public opinion, the U.S. public is generally on my side. In 2016, this the American National Election Study, which is a big scientific social science survey in political science with lots and lots of survey respondents, the people were asked, what should we do with the undocumented population? Should we deport? Should we give them guest worker passes so they can stay here temporarily? Should we let them become citizens after they pass a background check, do some other things, pay back taxes and things like that? Or should we just let them become citizens? Okay. Now, for all the discussion these days about deportation, it turns out that the majority of the people say, let's let them track towards citizenship. Okay, if we take the two bars there, the remain in the U.S. and apply for citizenship, or eventually, become citizens without any penalties, it turns out about 2 out of 3 U.S.-born Americans say, let them stay in the U.S., okay, let them become citizens. Only not even 1 out of 5 says deport, okay? So we have a lot of discussion these days about who's included, who's excluded, but in general, in American public opinion, there is a rough consensus, yeah, let's not go with deportation. So why is it that we're having so much conversation about deportation versus letting people remain here? Well, I think there are 3 kinds of arguments that float around. You guys may have heard some of this, okay? A lot of people say immigrants take jobs away from U.S. citizens, right? Have you heard that? Has anybody ever heard that? Immigrants depress wages, okay, yeah, they're going to take the job away from you. A lot of candidates running for office, they kind of make that argument, okay? Others say that immigrants corrode the rule of law, okay, so that it's bad to be here illegally. There's something wrong with that. And still others say that immigrants somehow corrupt traditional American values. So you take people in from other parts of the world and they're just not going to fit in, okay, with the rest of us. What I want to do is very briefly go over each of these points and we'll talk. And I am conscious here, I am trying to make an argument for you guys, okay? And there's going to be a lot here to discuss. Okay, the first point I want to make is this point, do immigrants take American jobs? Now, in terms of social science, this is a tough claim to investigate. What you have to do, I put this big word here, counterfactual. Has anybody ever heard the term counterfactual? That is a mouthful. Okay, I'm not looking at any hands. You got to be really pointy-headed to throw a word out like counterfactual. Think of it as, what would the world look like if we reran it but just took all the immigrants out, right? So what is the benchmark? What is our comparison? Okay, and it's hard to do that. You can't rerun the world, but people who work in economics try their darndest to do that through their modeling and their simulations, right? They try to get this crystal ball going so they can see what will the world look like. And in that literature, there's a hodgepodge of findings. But in a nutshell, there's no strong evidence that immigrants depress wages or create a lot of unemployment. Okay, not a lot of displacement of workers. If anything, there might be a small positive effect. One study that I'm familiar with that I think is particularly telling is in 1980, the Cuban government released 125,000 of its citizens to go settle in South Florida. This was just a temporary policy of the Castro regime to open up the formerly closed borders. And so you had this big boat lift. It's called the Mariel boat lift. And all of these people, these Cubans of working age, settled in South Florida, okay? A lot of them. How many? 7% of the local labor market in South Florida. In Miami, 7% increase, which in general, that's a heck of a big increase. You just plop 7% extra workers in. So you would think with that plopping the extra workers, you would think if new immigrants displace workers, increase unemployment, and so on, you would expect to see a lot of evidence there to that. But in fact, this study here, you can think of this as a kind of natural experiment, okay? What happened was a lot of nothing. What the Miami area was able to absorb all of these workers rather smoothly. So for every displaced US-born worker that you had other opportunities that would open up. So there were all these, what economists call multiplier effects, okay, that good things happen. The immigrants come, they put out more demand for businesses. There's, you know, it can help drive employment. And so we saw no huge effect, no negative effect or anything like that in this natural experiment. So for me, this comes as close as it gets to actually running an experiment on immigration. And it said that, you know, there's not a whole lot to worry about. There's not a lot of competition. Moreover, when we look at the number of years undocumented immigrants have lived in the United States, it's relatively rare to meet a newcomer. Okay, check this out. Immigrants without papers, now these are based on census estimates, immigrants without papers, about a third of them have lived here 15 years or more, okay? So about as long as a lot of you guys have been alive, or just about, right? You've had about a third of the undocumented population living in the US. Only a very small percentage, less than 20%, have lived here less than 5 years, okay? So we are, think about all the things you've done over the last 5 years, the friends you've made, the activities you've been involved in, what you've seen your parents get involved in. Okay, what this says is that the undocumented immigrant may not have authorization to reside here, but such a person is going to be thoroughly integrated into the economy, into the local social environment. Okay, we see lots of mixed families, so that one partner is undocumented, the other is US born or has papers. Okay, so what we've got here is a thoroughly mixed bag of living arrangements. The idea that you could take 11 million people and just take them out of their communities, okay? I don't think we have an apparatus to do that. That's, you know, there's no police force that could accomplish that. But even if it could accomplish that, what I'm suggesting, it would be terribly disruptive for the economy, okay? We would all suffer on account of that, okay? So I don't see a whole lot of oomph to the argument that immigrants are taking jobs away. I think it's just the opposite. We would be hurt if we went strong on deportation. The second point, corrosion of the rule of law. How many of you have ever heard this phrase? These are things you can get on Amazon, T-shirts, coffee mugs. Have you ever seen this phrase, heard this phrase? What part of illegal don't you understand? Okay, don't talk to me about undocumented immigration. Lawbreakers need to be punished. Do you know people who talk that way? Have you heard? Okay, it's a common sentiment, and I get it. The rule of law is extremely important. We all have to follow the law, okay? But at the same time, it's absolutely the case that the law is flexible, okay? There are terms like amnesty, clemency, commutation, and pardon, okay? These words all are having to do with showing some mercy to people who break the law, being flexible, allowing people in the larger spirit of community, allowing the law to be adjusted, to show good discretion. Judges do this all the time. Some famous examples here to point to. In 1863, Abraham Lincoln, after the US Civil War, by law, he had a right to have all of the rebels executed and their property confiscated. That would be within the letter of the law, and a lot of people wanted that to be done. And it's very understandable. I mean, think about it. We had the Civil War. The North paid a heavy price to recapture the South. What do you do with your rebels? Lincoln said, no, we're not going to have any mass hangings or anything like that. The rebels go back home, go back to their farms. They can keep their property. Okay, there was a big amnesty. Okay, so Lincoln technically showed mercy. Okay, he declared this amnesty in the spirit of being flexible in order to do the right thing, to do the just thing. He decided not to follow the letter of the law. More recently, and arguably not as importantly, I got out of a speeding ticket about 10 years ago. Okay, I was coming from Chicago back to Indiana. Guy pulls me up, a police officer pulls me over. I'm doing about 12 over the limit. I hadn't gotten a speeding ticket before. What did I do? I could go to driver's school. That's an online thing, okay? So that had a fee attached to it, but it's like the ticket didn't exist. Completely wiped off my record. I didn't have to pay more for auto insurance. Right now, as I sit here today, if you did a search of my records, you would see no evidence of a ticket, okay? I was illegal. Okay, I broke the law. And speeding, does anybody want to argue that speeding is not a bad thing? Of course speeding's a bad thing. There's a public safety issue here, okay? And yet I got out of it, okay, because the law had an amnesty in my case. The Internal Revenue Service, the entity you pay for your taxes, okay, or your parents are paying for taxes, they have an amnesty program. So if somebody has lots of money and they want to kind of hide it away, you know, under dubious legal circumstances offshore, this is a big issue these days we're talking about. There are a lot of these shady kinds of banking entities out in places that we can't see them, all right? Well, if you want to do the right thing, if you're in that boat and you want to do the right thing, the IRS will forgive you without a penalty. If you want to fess up, you come clean, you pay your back taxes, they're not going to throw you in jail. Okay. Well, is that right? I would say, yeah, sure. I mean, that's win-win. We don't populate our jails with people. We get a little more money for the Treasury, and people are doing the right thing, right? And they're being forgiven for it. So there's this long-standing tradition in our legal system to be somewhat flexible, right? If people are basically willing to do the right thing, the law can show some mercy towards that. Okay, if we think about illegal immigration, a couple of points I need to make. The first point is that to be an illegal immigrant in this country is historically not a violation of criminal law. In American legal circles, we have a distinction between criminal law, like if you steal something, you're breaking the law, that's a crime, versus a violation of administrative law. Okay, so to be out of compliance with a federal bureaucracy means that you are violating civil law or administrative law. Okay, and arguably, it's worse to violate criminal law. That's really what you have jails for and so on, right? The concept of an illegal immigrant, that very idea that there is such a person walking around who is perpetually subject to deportation, that concept dates only back to the 1920s. Previous to then, we just didn't have that vocabulary. We didn't have this idea. Of course, in American history, people could be kicked out of communities and so on for all kinds of reasons, right? We had lots of exclusion laws, but the idea that an individual is always at risk of deportation because he or she is an illegal immigrant, that idea is not even a century old, okay? So if we're a bit flexible in our policies towards illegal immigration, and if we show some mercy, if we declare something like an amnesty, it's hard to make the case, in my opinion, that would violate American rule of law, somehow compromise our legal system, given all of this. As I say, lots of food for thought. I'm looking forward to the discussion, but this is the way I respond when people show me, like that saying on the coffee mug and so on, what part of illegal don't you understand? One response could be, Well, there's, the law has some nuances. The law is a complicated thing. And anybody who would say such a thing to me, I'd ask them, did they ever beat a speeding ticket like I did? Okay, there are different exceptions to any law, right? Third point I want to make, and then I can turn it over. Okay. Is there a threat to American culture through immigration, and in particular illegal immigration? American political culture is deeply rooted. We have certain values like a belief in equality, a belief in opportunity, a belief in freedom, right? These are all Central American values. The value that you all should do your part. The support we give to our government institutions. Those are basic values, right? That's what it means to be an American. Well, last year about this time, I wrote a short publication for this journal. Okay, this is the title of it: Whose Commitment to the American Way of Life Needs to be Scrutinized and Questioned. Okay, and the argument I made was based on a big survey I did in 2012 called the Latino Immigrant National Election Study. This was a survey I did based at Purdue in West Lafayette, where I gathered data, original survey data, on over 1,000 Latino immigrants, where sampling was both citizen and non-citizen, including a lot of people who didn't have papers. Okay, and I wanted to find out, how did they see American politics? What were they doing during the campaigns? How did their views compare to the views of other Americans born in this country? Okay, there's not a lot of political science research on this, so I felt like I was really hitting kind of fresh pay dirt here on this research program. Okay, so the name of the study is, I called it LINES. That's the logo here, which stands for, again, Latino Immigrant National Election Study. And one of the questions I asked was, when you see an American flag flying, how does it make you feel? Now, this is not some trivial question. Just in recent weeks, we've been debating an awful lot what to do when the national anthem is playing at places like football games. You've probably read the news about that, right? A lot of back and forth about whether you should stand, kneel, salute, whatever, okay? Well, with this simple item, I broke down the responses to: you feel extremely good, or very good, moderately good, or not at all good when you see the American flag. A couple of takeaways from this table, right? The first is that, boy, it is a really rare person who feels bad when they see the American flag. Most of us like to look at the American flag, right? And check this out. There's absolutely no difference in attitudes, whether we're talking about the US-born electorate, Latino immigrants who have become naturalized US citizens, Latino immigrants who are not citizens but said they entered the country with their entry papers, or Latino immigrants who say they came without papers. Okay? There is not a dime's worth of difference across all of these different groups. Okay? So, lesson one: is there a threat to American values here? Well, on the face of it, immigrants, and even immigrants without papers, aren't out there shaking their fist at American national symbols or anything, right? They are seemingly as American as US-born Americans. What do you think about the US federal government? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it somewhere in the middle? Okay, if you want to find cynical people living in this country, don't talk to immigrants. Okay, talk to the US born. Okay, talk to people who were born here about what they think of the government. You're going to get an earful. I'm sure you have these kinds of conversations with your parents, your uncles, whatever, around the dinner table. Okay, it's as common as anything for people in the United States to criticize the government, right? I'm sure you know that. All right? I'm sure you've had those conversations. Okay, talk to immigrants, and what you're going to find is almost, to the extreme. They have rose-colored glasses. They value American politics. They hold American government in high esteem. Okay? especially immigrants who aren't citizens. Check it out. Over 7 out of 10 of the non-citizens have a positive impression of American governing institutions, as compared to fewer than 4 out of 10 of the US born. So if you want to find people who are true flag wavers, who hold American politics in high esteem, talk to those immigrants, okay? And it's going to be a breath of fresh air for you to juxtapose against all the cynicism and negativity we have floating around these days, okay? The third factoid I want to toss out for discussion: is voting a choice or a duty? Just this morning, with our other speaker, I was talking about this. Okay, opinions vary. Some people say it's a choice, right, that we have the freedom not to vote. Others say, no, it's your civic duty. You got to do the right thing in a democracy, right? Well, there's no evidence that non-citizens are actually voting illegally in this country. Okay, really, this has been looked at a lot, and there's no evidence of any law breaking on that front. But there's plenty of evidence that non-citizens think in a democracy voting is a duty, not a choice, okay? So if you want to find a group of people in this country that feels like they owe the country a lot, that they have a high sense of civic duty, immigrants, more so than the US born. The US born, look at this, about as many people say it's just a choice as opposed to a duty. Okay, so in general, the takeaway here, I went through 3 points, three common objections to giving papers to the paperless, okay? That the immigrants somehow deprive American workers of jobs or depress wages. The fact that somebody is an illegal immigrant is a threat somehow to our rule of law and our longstanding legal traditions, or that our culture cannot assimilate effectively these newcomers. They're just too different than people who were born in this country. And in each case, what I'm suggesting here, and I realize this is a point of view here, and this is just the beginning of a discussion, what I'm suggesting is that I don't see a lot of merit in any of those arguments. And those, to my ear, seem like the biggies. So if we take deportation off the table and say, let's give papers to the unauthorized, well, that still raises the question, what kind of papers? What do you want to do? You want to give them automatic citizenship rights? Do you want to give them just a, sort of temporary status of one kind or another? Do you want to try and go somewhere in between? And I'm not sure. I mean, I don't have a point of view, a firm argument to make about that. Opinions vary about what to do. Bring them in immediately to make them, if you're a US-born citizen, make them equivalent to you in politics. Okay, some people argue that. Others, notably former Governor Jeb Bush, argued in a book about 6 years ago that you should give undocumented immigrants some sort of status, but have it fall short of voting rights, have it fall short of citizenship rights. Just let them have residency paperwork, like develop a special visa so that they don't have to live in fear of deportation and they can work, but deprive them to an extent of civil rights. Okay, so no voting, no contributing to campaigns. Okay, well, that's one argument that's out there, and there are other frameworks for that. But in a nutshell, what I'm suggesting is that whatever the mechanism, whatever the paperwork we give, I think it's bad for American democracy. It's bad for the immigrants, but it's bad for all of us in this democracy to have a rather sizable group of 11 million people living this sort of in the shadowy sort of place in civil life, okay, where you don't have rights and claims the way the US-born would have, so, and naturalized citizens would have. So with that, yeah, I think I've spoken enough like this formally, but I'll look forward. I'll be hanging out during your discussion meetings, and I'll be looking forward to your comments and questions. So thanks very much, you guys, for your attention.
All right. Good morning, everybody. All right. Thank you, Rotary International District 6540, for inviting me this morning. And thank you most of all to all of you for being here and being part of this conversation. My name is Ahmed Mahmoud Rajab Ahmed Abdel Majid Salah Al Asmar. Got that? Can Can you repeat that for me, please? You got it? Okay. So I am also referred or known by my students as Dr. A. I'm the Assistant Dean of Experiential Education and Community Engagement with Manchester University's pharmacy program. Basically what that means, I set up all the clinical rotations for my students to be able to practice pharmacy in your Walgreens, your CVS's, independent, but also in the hospital, some research and things like that. So that's my role with Manchester University pharmacy program right here in Fort Wayne. I am an Arab American immigrant, and my journey to the United States actually started in June of 1948. I am Palestinian. My parents, in June of 1948, my father was 8 years old. My mother was about 5 when the Israeli army basically invaded their hometown of Yibna in the process of establishment of the State of Israel, and basically cleansed a lot of the towns, my parents' hometown included, out of its original inhabitants. So in 1948, my father, again at the age of 8, my mother at the age of 5, moved from Yibna, Palestine, to a brief stop in Gaza, Palestine, and then ended up in Rafah on the border close to Egypt. After high school, actually before that, this picture right here, this is a house, picture taken in the mid-90s of an Arab house in the town of Yibna. I can't remember what the Israeli name for the town right now. That's the house of my grandfather that I have not seen personally. But we found this picture on the website of PalestineRemembered.com. There's a lot of documented history about Palestine in there. In the early 60s, my father, after high school, got a job opportunity to move to Qatar. And so at the age of 18, 19, he moved to Qatar, where he started working with an automotive spare parts company. As a salesperson. A couple of years later, went back to Palestine, married my mom, came back, and all my siblings and I, 5 of us in total, 2 sisters, 2 brothers, were born and raised in Qatar. I'm the youngest of 5, or as I like to tell my brothers and sisters, that I'm the one who, when they got it right, they stopped. So all the young ones in here, the youngest in your family, use that line with them. Older brothers can be abusive sometimes. I'm just kidding. So in the 60s, again, my parents started their family in Qatar. We were all born and raised there. In 1996, I graduated high school from Qatar and moved to the United States, in particular, Cleveland. On my way, I slayed a fire-breathing dragon that lived in the ocean. Got to Cleveland in 96 because my brother had just graduated Case Western Reserve University as a dentist. And 8 or 9 months later, my parents got their legal documents to move to Canada, so I moved to London, Ontario, and now we're going to move in a little bit of warp speed. In London, Ontario, I lived for 3 years, got my bachelor's in biology, got my citizenship from Canada, and then moved to Big Rapids, Michigan for my Doctor of Pharmacy degree with Ferris State University, and then in Kalamazoo for the last 2 years of that degree. And then I'm like, I want to get out of the Midwest. It's boring. Sorry, I had family. I want to live in a big city. Decided to move to Seattle. It was totally coincidental, and I'm sticking to that story, that my wife right now happened to have moved to Seattle at the same time. We got married in Seattle. A year later, my wife is like, well, I'm from Michigan. I'm from the Midwest. I miss the snow. And I'm like, I was born and raised in the desert. I do not miss the snow. Needless to say, we moved to Bangor, Maine. Lived in Bangor, Maine for about 6 or 7 years, worked at a hospital, started building a new pharmacy program, and then 6 years ago, moved to Fort Wayne with 2 kids at the time to be closer to our families. I have a brother and a sister with their families in Michigan, and my wife's family is in Michigan. So we moved to Fort Wayne, Indiana with Manchester University, building the pharmacy program. So with this quick history about who I am, you can see that in the infamous bowl of Skittles, I am a brown one. Palestinian, Arab, Muslim, born and raised in the Middle East, all the qualifiers that would land me smack dab in the middle of the brown category. Now, to the discerning mind, we got to make sure that my shade of brown is not confused with, let's say, South American brown, North African brown, or Indian brown, and of course we're talking about India, Indian, not red Indians. And to the geographically astute that can tell that, Palestine is in Asia, the yellowness of my Asian origin does not supersede all my other brown categories. Are you getting what I'm trying to say here? Of course, obviously, we've made a lot of advancement in our terminology, and I'd be remiss if I don't use some of the current terminology when we talk about people like me and don't mention the recent advancements our society have made. So I am an Arab American, Muslim American. I am, of course, a minority, further subcategorized as an immigrant, especially when you hear my slight accent that pops up every now and again, even after 21 years of living in the Western world. But in reality, who lives behind that label? I shared with you my history over the past 21 years. My father, again, was a small businessman. My mother was a teacher. We were all born and raised in Qatar, but Qatar does not naturalize you, does not give you citizenship, like majority of the Arab countries. So I lived as a refugee with a refugee travel document in Qatar. Now, when I say that, nowadays, when we hear refugees, we think about Syrian refugee crisis and tents and a lot of issues. I had what would be called a middle-class lifestyle. My parents were both employed, both had a high school education, had a good income, but I did not have any rights as a citizen or as a resident of Qatar. So education for us, for my parents, was a way of survival. You get your degree. That degree will take you places, potentially gets you a citizenship in which you have your full rights as a citizen and become a member of the society. And that's why we moved to the western part of the world. I'm also the husband of a beautiful nurse in the making. She graduates from IPFW's nursing program this December. I have 3 children, 9-year-old, she turns 9 Saturday, and 2 sons, 6 and 4-year-old, with unlimited potential in this world and what they can do in the United States. I have a lot of friends and colleagues that I've built close relationships with over the years, yet the national discourse about me and people like me reduces me down to a label that erases the human behind it and serves as a shortcut to conclusions that can be crafted and manipulated by media and politicians and others to serve as a convenient, easy answer to complex questions. A label that can be or is, as the situation is currently, blamed for everything from lack of jobs to terrorist activities, a label that completely blinds you to the flesh and bones that carry it and carry with it real concerns, aspirations, and emotions. I'm going to quote some simple data. This comes, and I'm going to read here the description of the people who collected the data. New American Economy brings together more than 500 Republican, Democrat, and independent mayors and business leaders who support immigration reform that will help create jobs for America today. Their coalition members include mayors of more than 35 million people nationwide and business leaders of companies that generate more than $1.5 trillion and employ more than 4 million people across all sectors of the economy, from agriculture to aerospace, hospitality to high-tech, and media to manufacturing. So if we look at some numbers, and this is the website right there, from Indiana in particular, we find that Indiana is home to almost 323,000 foreign-born residents. 67,000 people in Indiana are employed by those immigrants. And immigrant-owned business creates about $244 million in income in 2014. And in 2014, immigrants in Indiana earned $8.1 billion, of which $702 million went to state and local taxes, and $1.6 billion went to federal taxes. But there's also the undocumented immigrants that we hear a lot about in the news today. And the undocumented immigrants, and again, I'm quoting from the same research, they're estimated at about 11 million undocumented immigrants in the United States. In Indiana in particular, it's estimated at about 107,000. But 87% of undocumented males in the country were employed in 2012 and 2013. And the researchers, as they comment in their findings, that suggests to them that most immigrants came here illegally or came here without papers, came to do so because of work opportunities, not because of the other narrative we hear on the news. In 2014, undocumented immigrants in Indiana earned an estimated $1.3 billion. Undocumented immigrants also contributed to our country's entitlement programs, from Social Security contribution of almost $65 million to $84 million dollars in income and taxes. But even though I quote numbers and I quote dollars and cents, I really hate the fact that I'm having to do this, because I'm reducing it yet again to a number. I'm reducing it to something that dehumanizes the person behind what we're talking about. It is problematic. It is challenging, as Dr. McCann spoke about in his presentation. It jeopardizes the rule of law. For example, having undocumented people living in the United States. It could create, in some discussions, a shadow economy, and so on and so forth. But all these conversations, we're talking about it as this illegal person. We need to deport them. We need to build a wall. We need to do this. We need to do that. Well, we've seen from the data that more than 80% of them have lived in the United States for more than 5 years. They have lives, they have families, they have ties in this country. A lot of them children that have, came here without their knowledge that they came here without proper papers or documentation. So when we talk about this, and this is not a new phenomenon, it's been happening for at least 30 years, we need to think more about what is behind that label that's being tossed around when we reduce it down to just illegal immigrant, foreign, whatever the case may be. So we go back to the label. Let's bring it back and kind of wrap it up. It's a short, quick presentation, but the power of the label, okay? So some might argue that labeling is simply a human trait. We do it, evolutionary speaking, as a safety mechanism. Your brain thinks when you see a snake, your brain thinks danger. You either run away or fight to protect your surrounding or whatever. And it's a shortcut that our brains have evolved to do. Think about walking, breathing, driving your car. You don't think about all the steps involved. You jump to a conclusion right away once you see certain characteristics. But we as humans cannot simply be reactive to a primal instinct in our dealing with one another. When we extend this behavior to our human interactions, especially with those who do not look like us and do not go beyond the superficiality of a label, we lose the main distinguishing factor that makes us human. We lose our ability to think, we lose our ability to choose and make conscious decisions. We lose sight of the beauty that exists in our vastly different shapes, sizes, colors, and philosophies, beliefs, outlooks on life. In my humble opinion, the existential crisis that we face in the United States today is our own biases fueled by ignorance. Our lack of understanding of one another, our lack of appreciation of the value of the life of the other. And it's time for us to take a deeper look at ourselves, address the politics of fear-mongering and hate, address the politics of oversimplification of concepts, and time for us to look beyond the convenience of a label. A lot of people ask me about the United States, and I liken it to one thing, and I'll wrap up with this thought. You've probably heard terms in sociology and whatever that we're a melting pot, right? The United States is a melting pot. I disagree. The United States is a mosaic. You know what a mosaic is? Lots of beautiful little pieces put together that make up one big, beautiful picture, right? Each little piece has its own defining characteristics, but it's a piece of the bigger picture. And so if we all look at each other in that sense, that we complement, we're all seeking the same things: better life, better future for our kids, for our countries, and move beyond just, I want these people out of my country, I want to build a wall to stop them from coming into the country, whatever the rhetoric that reduces, again, the human behind the label. We need to go away from that and start thinking more about how can we deal with an issue that is existent in our society today. With that, I thank you for your time, and we'll open it up for questions. you.